السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أقصيت عن الكونغرس الأميركي بضغوط من اللوبي الإسرائيلي لمواقفها من الشعوب المظلومة لا سيما الشعب الفلسطيني، وصمدت في وجه انتقادات لاذعة بشخصيتها القيادية. مع العضو السابق في الكونغرس الأميركي سينثيا ماكيني من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. قيادية امتلكت النار الكافية والمعرفة والاهتمام والحرص على شؤون الآخرين. هي سينثيا ماكيني العضو السابق في الكونغرس الأميركي ل6 دورات في مجلس النواب كديمقراطية من ولاية جورجيا. في عام 2008 كانت ماكيني مرشحة حزب الخضر لرئاسة الجمهورية الأمريكية، وكنائب في مجلس النواب الأمريكي تحدت بجرأة رئيسة مجلس النواب آنذاك نانسي بيلوسي عندما قدمت بنود اتهام ضد الرئيس جورج بوش الابن ونائبه ديك تشيني ووزيرة الخارجية كوندوليزا رايس على خلفية أحداث 11 من أيلول سبتمبر عام 2001. لطالما تمنت سينثيا ماكيني أن تجد جواباً على سؤال طرح في إحدى أغنيات الفنان الثائر بموسيقاه ضد العنصرية بوب مارلي: إلى متى يقتلون أنبياءنا بينما نقف جانباً ونتفرج؟ إلا أنها رفضت أن تكون متفرجة وقارعت الظلم على طريقتها العالية النبرة، متسلحة بالحقائق والأدلة الحسية. بشخصيتها القيادية وجلدها تحملت الإهانات والنقد اللاذع ودافعت عن حقوق المضطهدين من السود، ولكن المال الإسرائيلي أغدق لإخراجها من مجلس النواب الأمريكي لارتكابها واحداً من المحرمات في السياسة الأمريكية: الدفاع عن الفلسطينيين وحقوقهم المسلوبة. بحسب المراقبين من وجهة نظر المؤسسة الحاكمة في واشنطن، سينثيا ماكيني امرأة خطيرة للغاية، فقد تحدثت ودافعت عن الناس لا عن المجموعات ذات الاهتمامات المادية، والأهم من كل ذلك أنها تحدت الرواية الحكومية الرسمية المتعلقة بأحداث 11 من أيلول سبتمبر. المساعد السابق لوزير الخزانة الأمريكية للسياسة الاقتصادية الإعلامي بول كريغ روبرتس يصف سينثيا ماكيني بالواقعية إلى أقصى الحدود والمطلعة على أمور كثيرة ليست كالكثيرين في واشنطن والمؤسسات الإعلامية، وهي ملتزمة بمواقفها ومتيقنة أن الحقيقة والعدالة لابد أن تتغلبا على الظلم. العضو السابق في الكونغرس الأمريكي سينثيا ماكيني: ماذا تقول عن الممارسات العنصرية في أمريكا اليوم وازدواجية المعايير؟ وماذا حققت العدالة حتى الآن في قضية إعصار كاترينا في مدينة نيو أورليانز؟ Cynthia Mckinney, former American congresswoman and the most courageous politician and activist, according to many. Welcome to the Inside, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much.
It's our pleasure, ma'am. Now, let me take you back, Cynthia, 10 years ago, in 2005. Katrina survivors, Hurricane Katrina, and also Hurricane Rita survivors, looking for a road home, have found that road pockmarked by the potholes of racism, discrimination, and ineffective elected leadership. Well, what can you tell us about that?
You're absolutely right about that. And sadly, I would have to report that there are still families who were displaced as a result of Hurricane Katrina and the breaking of the levees, and they haven't made it home yet.
After 10 years.
After 10 years, that's right.
What does that indicate? What does that tell us in a country like the US? What's going on? This is a natural disaster. Why would the people of New Orleans, of this specific area, so to say, be treated as such?
Well, actually, they're being treated as second-class citizens, and actually, judging by that treatment, they are. So, honestly, I'm not surprised that the situation is so dire. Those of us who are familiar with the soft underbelly of U.S. imperialism, the rapaciousness of neoliberal capitalism. We know not to expect very much. Yet there are many people in the rest of the world who believe still that the United States is a beacon of liberty and freedom and justice and dignity and democracy. They believe that. And that mythology has been purposely built up, but many of us, we don't believe it, and a lot of people inside the United States never believed it.
You know, what is very much mind-boggling here is that even U.S. President back then, George W. Bush, in the State of the Union address, he failed to address Katrina. He failed to mention Katrina survivors, and even the Democratic majority in the Congress failed to include Katrina survivors among their priorities for the first 100 days of congressional action. It seems that, you know, turning a blind eye to the plight of those hundreds of thousands was on purpose.
Yes, of course it was, on purpose. And, you know, there's something called willful blindness, where people can see injustice, people can see poverty, people can see people in need and pain, and they know it exists, they know it's there, they see it, and yet they don't really take the next step, which is to incorporate that other people are hurting and that they have the ability to help them, and they end up doing nothing. And so we see that happen too many times. It's not just the Hurricane Katrina survivors who have been terribly mistreated. We have veterans who went to answer the call of the United States when the United States government said, we need you to go and fight. Well, unfortunately, they're mostly unjust wars, but the veterans, they answered the call, and then when they are in need of health care or even a place to live, we have veterans who are sleeping on the streets all over the United States, homeless.
Yes. However, you know, the Katrina survivors, through their People's Hurricane Relief Fund, are no longer willing to wait for justice. Back then in 2005, they have formed the Hurricanes Katrina and Rita International Tribunal to hold all levels of the government accountable for massive failures. You are among the people committed to the Katrina justice. Has anything been achieved?
Well,
have any steps, you know, moved forward in this sense?
Well, I think holding the People's Tribunal was very important.
Right.
Because what it did was it gave vent to the survivors to actually know who the failing elected representatives were at the time, and what should have happened, what they did not do, and where to place the blame. So the People's Tribunal was very important for that, and it utilized the resources, the legal resources, the intellectual resources of our community. And so that, I think, was an important step. Unfortunately, I have to report to you that one of the great movements that came out of the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina was an organization called On Common Ground. It was founded by Malik Rahim, who is a former Black Panther Party member. So this is someone from the community, of the community, who fought for the community and who understands the community. And it was later that he found out that his co-founder of On Common Ground, which is an organization that brought tens of thousands of college students into New Orleans, and they helped to rebuild the lower Ninth Ward. And the co-founder was an intelligence agent. And so that should indicate the perverseness of the United States government, that rather than sending funds and resources and helping
And aid
to
the-
rebuild,
yes.
they sent a government agent to spy on the young people
To
and
infiltrate,
on that movement.
yes, yeah, and destabilize such kind
That's
of
right.
movement. Now, does the racist double standard remains intact today in the U.S.?
Absolutely. Nothing has changed. Of course, when you have a government that was founded on the genocide of indigenous people, of the Native American population throughout the entire continent, was built on their genocide, and then the growth of the country, the economic growth of the country, was based on human trafficking. And that is stealing Africans from the African continent, bringing them over to the United States and working them to death. That is the reality. And that's why I say that some of us inside the United States are fully aware of the underbelly, the soft underbelly of what it means to be really a citizen of the United States, or a second class, a non-citizen of the United States. We know the United States too well.
Cynthia, well, recently you were interviewed by Paul Craig Roberts, and you were asked about leadership. You replied that at the local level in the Black communities there is leadership. It no longer gets media coverage, but it is there. Real leaders are those with the courage to dissent and to resist. It is the act of resistance that transforms an elected person into a leader. Your comment, please.
Oh, that's my quote, and
Yeah.
I really believe that. First of all,
Like Malcolm X, for example, or
that's
Martin
right.
Luther
That's
King.
right.
Yes.
And in my very first congressional campaign back in 1992, my campaign theme was "Warriors don't wear medals; they wear scars." And that came to me because as I would go throughout a very large congressional district, what I saw were people who would get up early in the morning, they would go to work, and then they would go to their community meeting after work, and they would give of themselves everything that they had. Some of these people still didn't have running water in their homes. But they were community warriors fighting for justice. And these are unsung heroes, but they exist, and they exist throughout the United States. And that's why I wanted, in that comment to Paul Craig Roberts, to recognize, yes, there is leadership in the community.
But where is this leadership today? I mean, has it been bought off, or was it simply no longer reported by the corporate media, by the Washington media?
It's ignored.
It's ignored.
It's ignored by the Washington media. It's ignored by what I call the special interest media. And so now, if there's something divisive or something about hatred or something that is a negative portrayal, then all the special interest media will be there. But the heroic acts in the community are never profiled and never shown, because of course that is the behavior that is not desired by those very special interests and the people who pull the strings of political power inside the United States. I'm not talking about those who are elected. I'm talking about those who control those who get elected.
Right.
And so because they don't want to see a vibrant civil society that is fighting for its rights and fighting to maintain its dignity, it's not shown on television.
Also, on the celebrities level, you have written a very important article about Hollywood, and you asked a question: what do Hollywood executives call Beyonce, Denzel Washington, and Halle Berry? Excuse me, nigger. Okay, you know, this is the word that you have used, and you said that the regular use of these words by powerful Hollywood executives is a telling indicator of Hollywood's pervasively racist attitudes toward blacks. Aren't you exaggerating here?
Absolutely
Cynthia?
not. In fact, the case of Leonard Rowe is a case of, he was a black concert promoter who was put out of business. All of the black concert promoters were put out of business because Hollywood executives enforce a kind of apartheid against black performers, entertainers. And so once they reach a certain level of popularity, then the black concert promoter would be able to tour them around the country and feed the economy, those proceeds back into the community. But once that black concert promoter had done his or her job and made that entertainer extremely popular, then the Hollywood executives would move in, snatch the entertainer, and not allow that entertainer to choose his or her own agents, nor concert promoters at all. That then went into the Hollywood executive, there's a little cabal of them, and they then control all of them. But
this happens with everyone, not all.
But wait. And so then, when Leonard Rowe filed a lawsuit against those Hollywood practices,
yes.
And the emails were discovered between the Hollywood, among the Hollywood executives as they talked about these black entertainers that they were in charge of promoting their careers. They called them nigger, gorilla, monkey.
True.
They used that kind of language to describe their own clients.
This case, does not only repeat itself inside US, but also across the border in the occupied territories. An incident took place, but we're going to speak about it after the break.
Okay.
Right? إذا فاصل قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيدا. في تشرين الثاني من عام 2014 أثناء زيارة قرية بلعين الفلسطينية للقاء سكان البلدة ولرؤية جدار الفصل العنصري الذي يبقي الفلسطينيين منفصلين عن أرضهم، هاجم جنود إسرائيليون مجموعة من الأميركيين من أصول أفريقية ممن كانوا يزورون البلدة بوابل من قنابل الغاز. العضو السابق في الكونغرس الأميركي سينثيا ماكيني، كيف تشرح هذه الممارسات الإسرائيلية ولماذا جرى إطلاق الغازات المسيلة للدموع باتجاههم؟
Well, that's not a question that I can answer. That's a question that the Israeli authorities must answer. But, why should African Americans be treated any differently than Africans are treated in Israel? And of course, we also know that even inside the Netanyahu household, the Africans who were employed by the Netanyahu family have filed a lawsuit because they've been beaten and harassed and talked down to. That's
the
right.
aftermath of the cast-led operation back in 2009. What happened to you?
Well, the first time we were taking construction supplies, since
medical aid and toys.
That's right. And the Israelis rammed the boat. Well, the second time, strictly coloring books, crayons.
Toys.
I mean, toys for the children. That's all. And we were put in prison. We were kidnapped by the Israelis while in international waters. And by an extremely circuitous route, we were taken to Ashdod, processed as criminals, made actually to walk from the boat that we were on with our hands up, as if we were criminals.
For how many days have you stayed there?
7 days.
7 days. And what has your government done in this sense?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Because, of course, the United States government kowtows in every way possible to the whims of the Israeli government.
Right. Now, Cynthia, also you've worked on a legislation to stop conventional weapons transfers to governments that are undemocratic or fail to respect human rights. And also, what about, to stop the weapons transfer to extremist groups that are wreaking havoc across our region? Because today we see that there is a funding and training of extremists who are used by some Arab and Western intelligence apparatuses to wreak havoc in Syria and in Iraq. What are you doing in this sense?
Unfortunately, the government of the United States is not to be trusted. And I would hope that people in the region would understand that while the United States talks about democracy on the one hand, it does not practice democracy at home on the other hand. While it talks about promotion of human rights on the one hand, its practice is a violation of human rights. And also, while it talks about religious freedom and the dignity of Islam, it uses and perverts Islam for its own political purposes. So with that having been said, then the legislation that I introduced was called the Arms Trade Code of Conduct. And the United States really needs to abide by some kind of code of conduct. You would think that being a member in good standing of the international community would be good enough to help the United States government become a good actor, but it hasn't. Just as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said some 50 years ago that the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence, then the United States today is still the greatest purveyor of violence on the planet. Now, sadly, I see genocide on the horizon, and I don't want to use that word, but how else can you describe what's happening now when whole countries are being destroyed? The weapon of choice is depleted uranium, and we know what that does to people that come in contact with the depleted uranium. But
and to the coming generation.
That's right. The entire DNA is attacked.
True.
And so what we're literally talking about is attacking the DNA of people throughout this region, because the air currents know no geographic boundaries. So they don't stop in Libya, they don't stop in Syria, they don't stop in Iraq. They continue to traverse the planet. Everyone is being subjected to this kind of nuclear warfare, and particularly in the region. So I have to look at how can we change U.S. policy, because ultimately it's going to be up to the people of the United States to erase the face that currently exists of the United States to the rest of the world and put another policy and image in place. The image has to come from a change in policy, not just a change in the faces. And so here is my appeal. My appeal would be for peace-loving, dignity-respecting people around the world to help a peace movement in the United States. That's what we really need, a peace movement that then transforms the politics inside Washington, D.C. That is possible.
We hope so. We hope so. Former U.S. Congresswoman and the most courageous politician and activist Cynthia ماكيني, many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, ma'am. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. المزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل. من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.